Good morning, everyone. We are here to kick off the 2022 Water Leaders Summit, and we are honored to have Jaclyn Porfilio with us. She is the Senior Policy Advisor to Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo. The Department of Commerce is a little bit of an unusual place for us to start the Water Leaders Summit, but the Department of Commerce is working very hard to help businesses and governments adapt to climate change. And of course, one of the key elements of climate change impact all across the board is water. And the Department of Commerce is doing something just as important, or perhaps even more important, and that is helping encourage the growth and creation of the clean economy and the blue economy, the proactive part of the economy that's gonna help us not only adapt to climate change impacts and new issues with water, but avoid them in the first place. So welcome with me, Jaclyn Porfilio. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Jaclyn.
Thank you so much for having me.
Briefly tell us what you do every day at the Department of Commerce. It sounds like you're involved in conversations about climate change and about water adaptation every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say thank you for that description of Commerce's role with these important topics. Very well articulated and very true. And I'm very happy to be here to talk about climate and water with you. So as you said, I work in Secretary Raimondo's office, and I work on climate policy, economic development, and supply chain policy. And as you noted, all of those are related. Growing clean energy industries creates jobs. Supply chains are disrupted by extreme weather events. And economic development can help build industries that help in the fight against climate change. And as the president often says, when he thinks about climate change, he thinks of jobs, which is jobs in clean tech, clean energy development, and climate adaptation. So I'm in conversations about climate where we're also thinking about jobs and equity and economic development. And I'm in conversations that are maybe more about other topics where we're bringing in the lens of climate. And in my role, I work closely with the different bureaus that make up the Department of Commerce, including the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, among several others.
Right, yeah, it's easy to forget that NOAA, which is the home to the National Weather Service, the gatherer and the agency that gathers climate data, but also looks for climate data, finds new sources of it. All of that is housed up under the Commerce Department. When our audience for the summit thinks about the federal government and water, we typically think about EPA. Why is climate change and water a priority for the Commerce Department and for Secretary Raimondo specifically? How does managing climate change fit in with the role of Commerce, and how exactly do those things mesh up?
Yeah. So first, I'll say you're right, that addressing the climate crisis is a top priority for Secretary Raimondo and the Department of Commerce. And water is a large part of what we do, specifically because NOAA is part of Commerce. They're the sort of part of the government most focused on oceans, which is, of course, our source of water here. So I think the reason that makes sense is because the environment and the economy are intrinsically linked. What's good for the environment is good for the economy, and vice versa. For example, as I mentioned, investing in clean technology will create millions of good jobs in the US, help us grow domestic industries and advance US competitiveness. It's also important to remember from an economic standpoint that we're already paying for the climate crisis. Last year alone, climate disasters cost the United States over $150 billion, and it's been getting worse. In the 1980s, the average time between billion-dollar climate disasters in the US was 82 days. Today, that's just 18 days. And so given that dynamic, yeah, not in a bad way, yeah. We know companies are working to decarbonize, but it's also important to remember that companies have to think about how to protect their assets and supply chains from climate disasters. And they need climate data and information to forecast, predict, and understand those risks and take action accordingly. And Commerce and NOAA in particular has that data and information. So,
Right. I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, no, that's okay. I was going to say just a little bit more about our climate focuses at Commerce, if that's helpful.
Hang on. Let me introduce it, and then you can unleash yourself.
Okay.
I mean, that's exactly right. The first thing is, I happen to know AT&T did this huge study of all of its assets in the Southeast, locating every asset, and then matching that with climate maps, and then climate prediction maps, so that key fiber optic switches, cell towers, where is all that stuff? What risk is it at on a routine basis when there's a hurricane, when there's another kind of storm, in flooding? That's sort of proactive planning. I know that the Commerce Department actually just in the last month or 6 weeks launched a new data service for the American economy, right? Without a stable environment, without knowing what's going to happen literally in the environment, you can't do business, right? UPS, FedEx, grocery store supply chain is all about being able to move the goods that move the economy from where they're made to where they need to go. And that's a very much a weather and climate related effort. But tell us about this new portal, which I spent an hour sort of drilling into in the last week. It's kind of an amazing array of data, all available free.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this. I'm glad you had a chance to look at it, and I hope everyone listening gets a chance to dig into the portal as well. So as you said, NOAA provides best-in-class data on our climate and what we expect to happen with our climate in the future, which is valuable information for things like the AT&T example, and tons of other businesses and other decision makers in state and local government, in universities, et cetera. I think the thing that we're focused on is the data itself is so important. NOAA has it. What's also important is that the data is actually being used. So it's a top priority for the secretary and the NOAA administrator to make NOAA's climate data as accessible as possible and as useful as possible to decision makers. And that looks like the AT&T example. It looks like a local town planner incorporating accurate flood risk into decisions about where to site infrastructure that's meant to last 30 or more years. It looks like companies pricing in risk of extreme weather events to their supply chains. It looks like an emergency manager getting real-time alerts when a wildfire is getting closer to their community. So many examples. And so with that in mind, in September, as you were saying, NOAA and the Department of Interior jointly launched a new website specifically to help communities across the nation understand the real-time climate-related hazards in their area and analyze projected long-term exposure to those hazards, and also identify federal funds that could support climate resilience projects for their communities. And this portal,
it's really, let me just pause. It's really amazing. It's resilience.climate.gov. Very easy to find. Resilience.climate.gov. And I'm going to let you talk about it a little more in a second. But there's flooding categories, drought categories, wildfire categories. You can literally search down to the street address, which is how I know what's going to happen to my mom's home in Miami, which is the home I grew up in. So, and going out 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So it has incredible data about what's happened in the country in the last month in each of those categories, but also what could happen in the next 5 years and 20 years. So it's both an immediate tool. am I at risk right now because of Hurricane Ian or the wildfires in New Mexico, but also where should I site warehouses, distribution centers, grocery stores, restaurants, and what's the risk going to be to those things?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just so folks know that the portal is called the Climate Mapping for Resilience and Adaptation Portal. And it's designed to be a one-stop shop for exactly those things, for people and businesses on the ground to plan and prepare for climate change and access federal resources to help with that. And so I won't get too into the technical here, but the website essentially integrates climate maps and data with non-climate data, such as building code standards and social vulnerability information, to try to really make it that one-stop shop for folks in instances like you're describing. So
right, all that data, you don't have,
it.
right, you don't have to go do anything. It's all layered in.
That's right.
And the other thing is, it's not static. This isn't the 2021 NOAA climate report in PDF form. It is updated with real-time climate data all the time. Again, you don't have to click, tell me what's happening now. It's literally like the National Weather Service for climate. In fact, we don't often think of it this way, but good data is a kind of infrastructure. We need to understand what's happening with jobs in the big picture, state by state, in our communities. We need to understand what's happening with government spending, with retail spending, with consumers. We certainly need to understand what's happening with climate. The weather data that NOAA provides, that the National Weather Service provides, has created a whole industry of private weather providers. Lots of companies have staff meteorologists, staff weather analysts. There are private weather companies that provide very specific location forecasts to companies whose work is really weather critical. That's a $16 billion a year industry. None of those companies or private meteorologists go out and gather their own weather data. They're using sophisticated analysis of the data the federal government gathers. Is it possible that this climate portal and all the data behind the climate portal is available? If you want to go drill in, put that data in your own algorithms, in your own models, it's available, which is kind of amazing. Are you guys imagining that a year from now and 5 years from now, there might be a climate resilience industry built on that data?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. And I think we're already in the beginnings of that. But that is the hope, right? So NOAA is providing, like you said, I think the Weather Service is a good analogy, a lot of world-class data. There's value to be added on top of that, and an industry to be grown there that also has social benefit, because it helps people tee up their specific decisions with the different ways that they might need that data cut or aggregated or merged with other data. So we talk about this a lot at NOAA and at Commerce, and we talk about it as a new industry called the new blue economy, which is essentially an industry underpinned by climate data and other ocean data. It's sort of like this emerging industry that takes that data and builds a product or service on top of it, exactly as you're describing. So think about an oyster hatchery that needs to know the pH trends of water to maximize their operation. Think about an offshore wind developer who needs to know where to site wind turbines based on wind speed or seafloor characteristics, or risks to protected marine species. Think about a sport fishing company that needs to know where the best game fish can be found for an upcoming sport fishing tournament, but isn't going to do that data analytics in-house. So this, I think, is a very exciting area. Again, a great intersection between water and economy. And I think the new blue economy is an industry in its early innings, but already touches a lot of different types of actors. And just quickly, I'll say I was in Rhode Island last week for Commerce's Discover Global Markets event for exporters. And the theme was the blue economy. And we talked about sort of this new age in ocean technology, sustainability, and logistics underpinned by this data. And there was a lot of excitement in that room, and I'm excited for what's to come over the coming years in this vein as well.
Yeah, you're preaching to the converted in this room. Of course, I think every time you say the blue economy, people smile, and that's exactly right. There's all kinds of ways this data can be used that we don't have to predict what those ways are going to be. It's like the space economy. It's like, you know, what's happened obviously with the digital economy. The availability of this data will inspire people. And a year ago, it didn't exist. A year ago, it wasn't accessible. In fact, on April 1st, it didn't exist. It wasn't accessible. So it's a whole new, just going to resilience.climate.gov gives you a little taste of it. But for anybody who's a little more deeply experienced and curious about the data, you can really dive deep. And there are all kinds of opportunities. I think the word you said that sort of stuck with me is decisions. Businesses and governments and NGOs need to make decisions every day. Some of those decisions are about what to do in the next 6 months. Some of those decisions are 5 or 20-year decisions. And now climate data is essential to making good decisions at every point along the way. Yeah. Are there other things that you encounter in the course of talking about climate policy and water impacts in the Department of Commerce that I haven't asked about that you want to underscore here just as we wrap up? Are there other initiatives people in the room might want to know about?
Yeah, thank you. I'll touch on a couple other things. We've talked a lot about NOAA for good reason, but I want to highlight a different part of the Department of Commerce, the Economic Development Administration, or EDA. For those who don't know, EDA makes grants to state and local governments, nonprofits, and colleges and universities to support economic development. And in that vein, EDA funds infrastructure improvements related to economic development, including drinking water and wastewater improvements that are identified by local communities as top priorities. So just a couple examples. This summer, EDA awarded $8.5 million to North Carolina for water and sewer system improvements that will support like manufacturing plants, a shipping and logistics company, and a business park. And last month, EDA awarded $2 million to an Indian reservation in Utah to improve their water supply. And then I just need to take a moment to say that, of course, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act are true game changers for water infrastructure and climate resilience infrastructure more broadly. Bill, as I'm sure everyone knows, includes $50 billion for EPA to improve drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure, which is the single largest investment in water that the federal government has ever made. And both Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act have money coming to NOAA related to climate resilience investments, nature-based solutions that have a lot of ties to water. So we're really grateful for that funding and excited for the impact that communities will get to see out of it.
Right. So the EDA, it sounds like, just to step back for 1 minute, yeah, it makes grants for really targeted projects that are also connected to an economic development effort. And that's a reminder. We in this room, in this group, we don't necessarily need that reminder, but you can't do business, you can't have jobs, you can't have a vibrant, imaginative economy without stable, clean, reliable water service. So that's something for people to pay a little bit of attention to. And yes, you guys aren't the big movers in the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, but again, the water community is tickled to death, and I would say impatient. Like let's get to it. We want to, what happened in Jackson, Mississippi last month is an example of exactly how even water systems that from the outside seem to be okay are going to have all kinds of fresh pressure put on them by climate change. And so we need to get about the business of adapting and hardening these systems as quickly as we can. One final question. You've been with the department since the beginning of the administration. I'm curious, and water folks sort of have a tradition of being relatively low profile. Things are going well in water when you're doing your job and no one needs to pay attention to you. But that's changing. That's changing dramatically. Climate change, almost all the impacts of climate change are water related. Too much water, too little water, water in the wrong place, water that used to fall as snow that falls as rain. I guess my last question for you is, what's the attitude about water, climate adaptation, and resilience in the conversations you're in, both inside government and in this sort of quote unquote whole of government effort of which Commerce is clearly a part, and also when you're in the room with business people, with CEOs, with logistics people? What's the attitude about water? Because for a long time, water didn't get much respect.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And I do think there's an increased focus from leaders across the sectors on water and on climate. Of course, the president came in with climate change as a day one priority and has been able to deliver on that through a couple of huge legislative wins and the whole of government response. And I think people are, taking notice of that and seeing changes in their operation, from a business perspective, their operations, their supply chains, and having to face these challenges head on. And so I think there's an urgency and a sense of this is the time where we roll up our sleeves and figure this out for some of the challenges that we're facing now. And I'll say I've worked on environmental and climate topics in my previous job as well, so several years now, and I think that conversation really has changed, and this is much more in the forefront now than it was in the past.
Well, that is good for us to hear, because these, as everybody knows, water problems almost never get better on their own. So a sense of urgency, but also what I appreciate about you kicking us off this morning is a sense of optimism. We can tackle these problems, and in many ways, tackling them is good for the economy, is good for companies. It not only creates jobs, it creates, it's possible we're going to create a whole bunch of new industries, industries that are good for people coming out of college, that are, that require imaginative thinking, technology, and that also allow us to help not just the United States, but the rest of the world if we do it right.
Absolutely.
All right, Jaclyn, thank you for joining us this morning. We appreciate your time and your work every day. Keep water front and center. That's what we like.
Thank you.
Thank you.